Greetings. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks, Sr., your host, and this is Community Forum. This evening, we're going to be talking about citizens' justice. Community Forum has been airing since 1993, and it's a weekly program searching all over Lake County for the best talented people that you should know. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the people that you should know. The first is Tara Thomas. She's the co-host for Community Forum, and she's also a founder of North Shore Prep Foundation. Sitting next to her is Lord Preacher Howard, a community activist in Lake County. And next to him is Denise Rothheimer, founder and executive director, Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence. As a matter of fact, that's been in operation since 2008. And next to her left is Dr. Tom Rudd, MD, Lake County coroner. And our anchor man is Ralph Peterson Jr., a community activist, and he'll tell us about the many other opportunities that he has for citizens here in Lake County. But first of all, Tara, our topic today is citizens' justice, and I don't think we've covered that. And
this is a new one.
I think it's very appropriate, right?
Yes.
Don't you think so?
I do, and it's a new topic for us.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things happening all over the country, and things are happening right here in Lake County that we should know about, right?
Right, and I thought we might want to start with Denise, since that's really your purpose and one that I'm extremely interested in. And as we talked before we went on the air, there are a lot of injustices for victims that are going on. And
you know, first of all, we have Lord Preacher Howard with us, and he's a senior member. And do you know there's an African tradition that says you have to get permission from your elders before you start any event? So, Lord Preacher Howard.
Well, I beg your pardon. You should have started with Preacher Howard, not me.
I'm working on it. Do we have your permission to start this program?
Yes, we do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Now you can go ahead with
Preacher, let me just say that my mother is from Alabama, and she raised me to be very respectful. So I beg your pardon on that. That Mr. Dr. Brooks didn't give me the heads up on that. Okay. All right. So now we will move forward. Okay. Mom, I'm sorry. Okay. So Denise, could we start with your because I know you've been here before.
Yes.
And I think at the time I said you needed to come back because I don't think we completed the topic. And it definitely encompasses everything that everyone is here sitting about. Particularly, I want to get into the John Reed technique eventually because that's marvelous. But can we start with you today? Is that okay?
Sure. I'm actually working to propose legislation. Actually, Dr. Rudd did sign a letter of endorsement to help my effort to provide victims of crime with legal representation to assert their rights. And what I have found is that going through the criminal justice process, as a victim, you really become dwindled down to nothing more than a mere witness. So you're basically going to be used or called upon at the discretion of the state's attorney, who then has full reign and authority over asserting your rights, enforcing your rights, or even violating your rights without consequence. And there is no remedy. And what that means is if you, as a first-class American citizen like myself, believe that we all have a Fourth Amendment right to due process and equal protection of law, when you find yourself where, in my case, my daughter was raped, I know in the case of Ralph, his cousin was murdered. We're what you call crime victims. Even though we're first-class American citizens, our voice doesn't get heard. So our First Amendment right to file a redress for grievances, petition our government, is basically unenforceable. And what I'm trying to do is, rather than having victims become further victimized by the system when their right is violated, that's in addition to the victimization of the violent crime.
So the victims you're referring to here are not the ones who were the recipients of the crime, but the families.
No, the recipients of the crime.
And the families.
Right, so in Ralph's case, because his cousin is deceased, the family becomes the survivor.
I see.
In my case, because my daughter was 11 at the time of her rape, She had the rights, but I, as the adult or the parent, the guardian, also had a right to be able to ensure that she would be present. She would give a victim impact statement. She told the prosecutor she wanted the judge to know what had happened to her and the harm it caused. But my child got railroaded. She was 12 years old at the time. I was lied to by the prosecutor. The defense attorney actually told me in the morning on that court date that the state agreed to enter into a plea deal. Well, I said, for how long? And he said 6 years. And that was the minimum. So I went and searched for the prosecutor, and I found her, and I said, I was informed that you agreed to a plea deal of 6 years minimum. And she said, yes. And I said, well, you know, why did you do that? And she said, well, you're not a lawyer. I don't have to explain the law to you. I told her I'm the mother. I went to the court, and not having any representation, because I was told previously I could not hire an attorney for my daughter in the criminal court by this same prosecutor that worked for the nationally disgraced former Lake County State's Attorney Michael J. Waller. And so when I went into the courtroom, I saw the bailiff, and I said, could you let the judge know I disagree with the plea deal? When the prosecutor presented the factual basis, she basically defamed my child. Normally people think defense attorneys are the ones who harp on the victim. And so the bailiff then approached the judge, informed the judge that I disagreed. The judge called me to speak, and I gave the factual basis of the case, of the law, because I knew the law from the police detective. The judge said, based on what I said, she was absolutely not going to accept the plea deal and rejected it. And it's all in court transcript.
Okay.
But the case was over, and I stood there waiting to talk about the second victim, because there was this plea deal. It knocked all the 6 of the 7 charges out, and the second victim was completely eliminated, who was also a minor. And I waited, and so the bailiff had to escort me out and say, Ms. Rothheimer, it's over. But it wasn't over. Actually, that was the beginning. And to this day, I'm still advocating for justice for victims of crime to prevent them from becoming further victimized by the system.
Do you feel your daughter's case, you did receive justice eventually?
No, he only got a 7.5-year sentence, and the second victim never even got justice. See, he could have been sentenced to life on 2 Class X felonies. A Class X felony is comparable to homicide. He was convicted of only 1 Class X. That's why they dropped the other, because they wanted to give him a plea deal.
Dr. Reed, Dr. Rutt, excuse me, would you discuss the John Reed technique with us?
Okay.
Because it kind of circumvents, it's involved in all of these cases.
In regards to the Kalazinski case, which was just shown on 48 Hours, I think 2 Saturdays ago, the uproar from that show was not only her conviction, but the interrogation. And the interrogation was done by a technique called Reed, R-E-I-D, John Reed. He was a detective for Chicago, and after he retired in the 40s or 50s, he decided to found this company where he would teach police how to interview. And it's based strictly on anxiety. If a defendant exhibits anxiety, that makes you suspicious for him being the guilty person. The problem with the Reed technique is that there's absolutely no psychological theory behind it whatsoever. It's pure experience of one policeman who founded this company. And it's taught throughout this country as the interrogation technique.
And this was since the 1940s or 1950s?
It's about 40s to 50s when John Reed started promoting it. It's now an educational business. It makes quite a bit of money teaching people because it's not done for free. As I said, the technique has no scientific psychological theory behind it. And the problem is you are allowed to swear, you're allowed to raise your voice, you're allowed to pound your wrist, and more importantly, you're allowed to lie. Now, this has all been upheld by the United States Supreme Court, which is most people don't understand. And a lot of times, you know, the police officers look bad when they use this technique, but we have to understand this is the technique they've been told to use.
Yes.
It's not necessarily the law enforcement people themselves. They're just told what to do, okay? And this is the technique that's used. Now, in the 1990s, in England, there was a lot of people that wrongfully confessed. And Great Britain's government said, we've got to stop this. They have a new technique called PEACE, P-E-A-C-E.
Right.
And I'm not going to run through each letter what it means.
Okay.
Basically, you interview a potential criminal as if you're a news reporter. You're not allowed to yell. You're not allowed to swear. You're not allowed to lie. But you go into great details of the crime situation, and you document it in great details, and then you go back and repeat the interview. It's when you catch them in a significant lie or description that you now know where to focus on the individual, because there's a lot of cognitive burden when you lie. Because since you're lying and it's made up, it's tough to remember all the scenes that you're trying to do around it. That's the better technique. Great Britain and Wales use it, and they've reduced their wrongful coerced confessions.
Is there a proposal to interject that?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. This is a technique that is, you know, long used, and it's hard for law enforcement to change, especially since it's used nationally.
Well, in terms of the young lady that trial was several years ago in Lincolnshire.
Correct. Melissa Kalazinski.
Yes. I don't know how the John Reed.
Well, they used the Reed technique. The problem with her is that she also had an IQ, a verbal IQ of 74. And so you're now essentially interviewing a preteen.
And she was 22?
She was 22 biological age, but her verbal IQ was 74.
Okay.
And if you watch the technique, you can see how she's worn down. And near the end, they basically say, just admit to it and we will send you home. And they kept repeating, admit to it and we'll send you home.
And that's because John Reed's technique allows you to lie.
Correct. They were telling her, well, the autopsy findings show this. Therefore, you must be guilty. You're lying to us. Confess.
But shouldn't there be a lawyer present when they question?
Well, unfortunately, from what I gather, Melissa waived her Miranda rights.
But
okay.
Did she even understand her Miranda right to waive?
That's a good question too. That's a good question, and I don't recall seeing when she waived them on the film. They may have kept it off, or maybe it's there and I didn't see it. Okay. Generally, people who are innocent are more than willing to release their Miranda rights because they figure, I'm innocent. And even if they confess, they think, well, this will be found out in court. And it's not. And once you sign a confession, that trumps innocence.
So even if she wanted to bring her case back up, now she wanted to appeal it, because there's confession, even though it was received in proper manner, can she have an appeal?
She's had an appeal on the original evidence, and it went, I believe, from county to appellate and maybe Illinois State Supreme Court, and she was denied. However, the autopsy findings, which we can go into, were misinterpreted, and so they're starting the appeal again with the correct autopsy interpretation. Okay, and when I came into the office, I was asked by the defense attorney to look at the autopsy findings, and I was stunned when I saw that they were totally misinterpreted. Simply, the child allegedly had an acute event, an acute catastrophic event. In other words, the child died of a cause within a few minutes of his death, when in fact, the findings are an old catastrophic event, which we now have documented from the records of the daycare center, occurred 6 weeks ago. So it was that event that set this child up to die. He was slowly bleeding in his brain. And the defendant actually had no contact with him in the trial prior to his death, yet the confession trumped over the fact that testimony said she was not there when the child died. Okay? The child was in a seat several feet away, nowhere near her. It was the other daycare worker who actually took him out of the chair, put him on the floor, he slightly bumped his head like kids do, and then he ran off to his bouncy chair, got in the chair, and Melissa comes in, Starts taking care of the other kids. She looked over, he's okay. A few minutes later, she looks over, he's dead.
I see.
So she was not in physical contact with them, even though in testimony. Yet, because she signed a confession, it didn't matter
So
to the
even
jury.
if the medical examiner comes forth with information like you have, that doesn't make an impression?
Well, I presented the evidence 22 months ago to the state's attorney of the findings. I brought in another pathologist to review it, a medical examiner by the name of Dr. Jones, who works for us. She wrote a detailed report. I sent a cover letter to him with the report, hand-delivered to his office 22 months ago, and no response.
You've not heard anything from them?
No, he said he didn't get it, according to a newspaper article a few weeks ago, but actually he then admitted he did. What's more important is I got the original autopsy pathologist to admit to his mistake. We had an affidavit signed, and that was about 19 months ago, and we gave him the affidavit. He still refused to act. So the autopsy pathologist that did the case and missed the findings said, I'm sorry, I missed the findings. Dr. Rudd's correct, and Dr. Jones is correct with the findings, and he still wouldn't move on
And
it.
that should be enough to have an appeal.
I would say that would be enough for the state's attorney to turn it over to his wrongful conviction committee that he found. When he ran, he said, I'm going to establish a committee to look at cases that potentially were in error. This is one of the few cases he refuses to show to his committee, which, by the way, has no authority over him. They make a judgment. He does not have to follow them. So the question is, what is he afraid of?
Was there a civil lawsuit involved where there was monies?
Yes, the parents of the
compensation?
deceased child did sue the daycare center and did receive money for it.
So maybe that's the problem.
One thing I can say, Tara, is that under Dr. Rudd, characteristics of the corner that Dr. Rudd is, the findings has to be honest, professional, compassion, and complete integrity. And they fit him. And I would say this, are you the first pathologist in Lake County?
Correct. We've never had a physician pathologist in this office. We
Right.
did have one physician who was emergency room physician, but never a pathologist. I just wanted to say that you bring that up. This office is law enforcement, but we don't work for the state's attorney. We don't work for the defense. We don't work for the sheriff's office. We work for the deceased patient and immediate family. All we care about is the truth of the anatomical findings. And when that is done, then only then can a person get a fair trial. These anatomic findings in the initial autopsy were grossly mistaken in their interpretation. And we got the original pathologist to change his mind, and yet the state's attorney's office continues to refuse to present it to his wrongful conviction committee.
Well, the group like what Denise has, can you release any information to her group? I mean, once you have these findings, I'm sure they're supposed to be used for the betterment of the victim, and they're supposed to be used in a correct legal manner. If they're not, and if they're buried, then what's the next option?
Well, the family, Melissa's family has a defense attorney that we will go back into the courts and present my evidence.
Okay.
Okay, because the first round of appeal is on original evidence, not the evidence that I found. So now we start all over again. This is why people spend so much time in jail. It's just this laborious court proceedings. And so, you know, we end up releasing 6 people in Lake County with DNA that proved them innocent, and all 6 having false coerced confessions. And yet they spend 80 to 90% of their time in jail, and then we say, what good people we are, we released them. Well, they spent most of their time in jail.
And they were innocent.
And they released them.
In Melissa Kalasinski's
Kalazinski.
Case, she was sentenced to 31 years.
31
right?
years, and she's been in since 2009.
2009.
Right. They denied her bail. She was convicted in 11, but they made her sit in jail for 2 years until the court proceedings went on.
But she's still in jail now.
Yes, 6 years.
And this is basically because the state's attorney say subject to his review, he's not going to.
He says he's reviewed all the evidence, and he doesn't see fit to send it to his wrongful conviction committee, despite the fact he's had evidence for 22 months that shows the original autopsy interpretation is wrong.
So who can supersede him? That's my question.
Nobody.
So if
Only the courts.
okay,
But
so
that's a long procedure. But
okay,
nobody
so
can
if it stops
force
with
him.
him,
No.
then now you go back to the to
the courts. And so you'll sit there for years while it's fought. This is what happened with Benny Starks, Rivera, to show you the Reed technique in terms of the use in Mr. Rivera's case. He was interrogated by the Reed technique for 4 days straight.
No sleep.
4 hours.
Okay.
Who could withstand that? And people say, well, if I committed murder, I would never confess. How many of our pilots have fallen on the other side in enemy territory, North Korea, North Vietnam, Red China, Russia, and go on the air and condemn our country for terrible acts? And these are servicemen who you would think could withstand any type of browbeating. Granted, they probably got worse treatment than Melissa, but still, these are young men who you think would fight it off. You can be forced into a false confession even though you're innocent. And that's why we've got to change a lot of things in this judicial system.
What we'd like to do, along with your presentation, Ralph Peterson Jr., you are a community activist among the other things. Can you relate to a similar incident that Dr. Rudd mentioned? He mentioned Melissa Kalasinski, but there was, I think this was a cousin of yours in North Chicago that was beaten to death by 6 policemen in North Chicago. And there are events leading up to that. That case has not been settled yet, only because the state's attorney, I think recently he turned it over to Department of Justice, and I guess that's where it's now. The mayor would not take action. He sent it to the state's attorney, and the state's attorney sent Department of Justice. Where does it lie now? Is that similar case that?
Yeah, well, it's in federal court now. But first, I want to back up a little bit. First of all, there were 6 officers that came into the apartment and beat Darren Hanna, literally beat him to death. Okay. All their reports were different. If one said up, the other said down. If one said left, the other said right. None of them were consistent. Now, we've had, I want to use Denise's terminology, very notorious former state's attorney Waller.
Nationally disgraced.
Nationally disgraced, right, state's attorney Waller. And what happened was he reigned between, 22, 25 years. So within that time, you pretty much could say he had a Waller machine. And it was very corrupt. And as the Rudd said, there's nobody who can supersede the law. You can't prosecute the state's attorney. He can be dead wrong, and there's nothing you can do to. There's nothing you can do to him. So this mentality, Nierheim, I want to bring this point out because this falls into Kaluzinski and a bunch of other things. This mentality is still present because, like I say, this guy was very cruel, unjust. Evidence would be right there in his face, and he'd sweep it under the rug and give his ruling. That mentality is still present. Nierheim is still acting up under that same mentality. The police officers are still up under that mentality. So actually, when Nierheim came in, he got the same thing. What I'm saying, the same soup, just in a different bowl. And this is the reason why a lot of this injustice is taking place, a lot of it. Now, Nierheim normally says that he'll look at a case. Now, this is the Darren Hanna case. He'll look at a case if there's new evidence. This guy, Waller, was so corrupt, and I'm going to use the word wicked. Right here, laying on the table, is his press release. And in his press release, there's things he's saying that's not even on any of the reports, stating the young lady was screaming out of the window and Hannah took her head and dumped it under the water and all that. So my thing is, what we've been trying to ask Nierheim, you keep saying bring about new evidence. We'd like to see where this evidence that Waller basically said he wasn't going to investigate. Where did he get his evidence from? So I guess the bottom line to what I'm saying is we're still dealing with the after effects of Michael Waller. You know, there's still, that mentality is still present. And until we address that, because Nierheim has only been in office 3 years, until we address that, we're going to keep having this problem.
So are you saying Nierheim, all he's doing is maybe Whaler's not there in person? We have a new Whaler, but the same old, same old?
Yeah. Exactly what I'm saying is we're dealing with the same soup, is just in a different bowl.
Okay, so this is what I need to ask you at this point. What can we do? Because based on what Dr. Rudd has said, I mean, he has given substantial evidence. He has given, he's a medical doctor. And in the past, I think the coroner was not a doctor, if I'm not mistaken. So now we have an actual medical doctor, which we should have always had. Most pathologists, most coroners are pathologists or doctors. All right, so, but regardless. So now we've corrected that. We have a doctor in essence, and he has given documentation. He's giving critical medical evidence to reopen both of these cases. And to date, they're just being set, and that was my question earlier. So, do we need a law to be created to supersede the state's attorney? I mean, it's almost like the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court gives you a ruling, that's it. So is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that would make things much better, because then they will be held accountable. See, right now, Nierheim, as the same as Waller, he can say and pretty much do as he pleases, and he's not going to be held accountable. In a sense, he can be if the people were to wake up and really get involved, you know, because we could vote him out, which we should do, you know, next go round, because like I say, we've got the same, there's no difference in Waller.
But is it the office, or do we need new legislation?
New legislation.
That's what it sounds like, because no matter who comes into office, we can still go through this again. I mean, I'm having the same thing trying to get a charter school here, trust me. Once you got a person who's dead set against it, you need legislation.
Yeah, we could use legislation, but for right now, we have to use what's in front of us, and that's getting him out of there, and we'll take a chance on the next guy being fair.
And this, you sheds a lot of light to a lot of people in Lake County that voted for Waller, because when the newspaper highlighted you carrying signs protesting an award that Waller was getting, then you had a march in front of the county building, and a lot of people was unaware that, you know, why you were doing that.
Because I felt that it was a shame to award this guy, give him an award. I mean, we've got Rivera, Hobbs, Starks, etc.
Edwards.
Yeah, Edwards, that he's unjustly convicted and ruined their lives. And here's what really killed me. The evidence was a file cabinet away for 19, 20, 22 years. A file cabinet away, and nothing was did about it. And these guys spent the majority of their lives in jail, and when they're finally released, and that bothers me too, as Dr. Rudd said, then they feel that they can blow their horn as though they did something great. And all the time, again, I repeat, the evidence was a file cabinet away. It's really a shame. There should be new legislation, because there's no way that one individual should have that much power, you know. But in closing, I want to say again, that mentality. See, they've been so successful. See, this has been the norm, what's happening with the Kaluzinski, with the Riveras, the Starks, etc. This has been the norm. And on their side of the fence, we find it good. It's working. Conviction was up to, what was it, 93%. So they find it good. And that mentality is still there today. It breaks my heart that I hear a lot of people say, now don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things in the black community we've got to get together, and I'll be the first to tell you. But I went to, real briefly, I actually got up and walked out. I went to a church, what was it, For Real Talk, For Real.
Straight Talk?
Straight Talk up in Zion at a Pastor Logan church.
Okay.
And it just broke my heart to hear everyone sitting up there just firing in on the black community. Well, blacks, they won't vote, which this is true. Well, blacks, they won't put in for these jobs. That's true. You know, black this, black that, but now, a lot of what they said is valid, but there's another flip side to that coin. Waller had a 20-year reign. He tagged, I mean, really, he's done 40 to 50 years worth of damage. I can, now they're older now, but even now, I can find you 22-year-old boys that's walking around with felonies, from petty thefts, from getting caught with a marijuana cigarette. So these jobs, as far as firemen and police, it ain't gonna happen. So, and if Daddy is knocked out of commission and he can't be productive, it's gonna affect Junior. And that's why I got up and walked out of this pastor's church, because no, you know, Waller was the pink elephant. Nobody wanted to touch that. And that he plays today a major part on why the black community is in bad shape.
And I agree, we can't blame him for all the problems that are going on in the black community, but certainly a substantial amount can be contributed to
Acknowledge
itself.
it, you know.
You know, exactly, but we've got to also, we've got to do things in terms of being aware. Like I think what all of you are doing here today in terms of information. I transferred here from Michigan, so a lot of this I wasn't aware of. And for someone to have absolute power, that's what it sounds like. This
Well,
is
that is
absolute
what
power.
it is. It's an actual doctrine called absolute immunity by our U.S. Supreme
That's
Court.
very dangerous.
And they can be held, prosecutors can be prosecuted only if they act outside their prosecutorial role. So if they are acting as an investigator, then they can be held criminally liable, like we had Nufeng, the prosecutor who wrongfully charged the boys who were on that team, Duke Lacrosse. And so he did get criminal charges against him because he acted outside his prosecutorial role. But that's the only time you can get him.
The baseball team?
No, the lacrosse, Duke Lacrosse. It was a case where a woman had alleged rape, but she wasn't raped. And the boys, their moms and dads really got together to bring forth the evidence and wouldn't allow their sons to be wrongfully convicted. So they were able to uncover in that investigation that Nufeng actually, or Naifong, actually stepped out of his prosecutorial role, which is why he pretty much was a national icon for being one of the very few state's attorneys who's ever been held criminally liable.
But he was held liable.
Yes, only because he acted outside his prosecutorial role. Now, within their prosecutorial role, they can present false evidence. They can withhold exculpatory evidence. These are things that they can do without being sued. Now, there's the Brady violation, where if you do withhold exculpatory evidence, then your case is going to unfold. But so what if there's no personal liability?
So is that the real problem? The reason they don't want to go back and open these cases up, because they don't want to assume liability. I mean, as opposed to
Well,
say,
they're not the ones liable. Taxpayers are.
But
See,
is that
that's
it?
a key
Is
statement.
that the key?
The key statement, what Denise said is, we, the people of the county, will pay for their mistakes,
Right.
and they don't have to in terms of monetary rewards.
But it's all about money. These people's lives, they're sitting in prison.
No, it's about power.
Well,
Yeah,
Ms.
exactly.
Kalinsky is sitting there because of power and money, from
Correct.
what you're saying. They won't let her out, because I'm like, well, why won't they just go back into this file cabinet that Mr. Ralph Peterson has nicely told us
Because
existed?
there's what's called the prosecutorial theory. And prosecutorial theories are what leads to convictions in some cases, wrongful convictions. In '09, I was advocating for Hobbs and Rivera.
Okay.
So the reason why I took to those two cases is because, for one thing, in Rivera's case, you had an 11-year-old rape murder victim,
Okay.
and my child was 11. And remember how I told you at the beginning, my child was defamed by the prosecutor?
And the second one didn't
Well,
come
the
out.
prosecutor in the case prosecuting Rivera, Mermel, he fought for the right to dirty up, in his words, dirty up the victim. And the reason he had to dirty up the victim is because in order to explain away DNA evidence, because there was evidence DNA found, but it didn't match Rivera. So now you have to explain it away. And how you do that is you come up with a theory. The 11-year-old had consensual sex with men. That was the prosecutor's argument. They dirtied her up to explain that that DNA was from her having, which children cannot consent to.
I thought the prosecutor would
adults.
always, generally in a case like that, they defend the 11-year-old. I thought they
Well,
came
just like
to
I said with my daughter, the prosecutor defamed my daughter, which is why I've been on this mission as long as I have. And in speaking out, in educating the people, the public, and with that protest of Waller's Award, people have got to understand we're not out here because we're angry. We're out here trying to save you.
Right.
We're trying to prevent you from becoming further victimized, because there's a conviction
Right.
which has nothing to do with justice. Now, in the Hobbs case, there was about the little 8-year-old girl, Laura Hobbs, and her friend, Crystal Tobias. They were both murdered. Well, there was, again, DNA found in Laura, and it was dubbed sexual assault.
Okay.
Well, you have to explain that away because Hobbs' DNA didn't match. So how did they come up? What was their prosecutorial theory? Well, they said that the sperm in the woods had jumped off the trees where the couple had been having sex and got into little Laura. That's why that man sat in the jail for 5 years. Prosecutorial theory. So really, people have to understand that, you know, with absolute immunity, and this is something I've been advocating for years and actually abolishing the grand jury, is because they can lie, they can commit perjury, and there's nothing you can do. And you can actually put yourself in harm's way by speaking out because you get retaliated. Like in the Melissa case, there's a wonderful reporter, Ruth Fuller. She did a story on my daughter, Jasmine's Law, before she did Melissa's case. I met her in person. We did some charity work. I know she was very active and involved. She's a humanitarian type person. And she ended up basically losing her job after she ran the story. But in 2008, when I had the editor of the New Sun do my story and expose Waller's office, he got a call from the state's attorney's office, which he's on video saying, and I still have the recording, that he was threatened not to run it. He ran it anyway because he said in good conscience he had to do that. Well, he got fired 2 months later. So when we try to explain and bring forth legislation to change the way the system is, people are, why do victims need lawyers? Well, the prosecutor does not represent you. And you, in the law, in Illinois law, it says victims are often ignored and excluded and are at risk of becoming further victimized by the system. So it's the system I'm trying to raise awareness about and educating people on, not putting all prosecutors in the same bucket, because that's not the case at all, but when you have them there, those individuals, we, like myself, Melissa, Ralph, and all the others, where do you go? Where do you go?
Well, that's what I was thinking. So the prosecutors, do they protect the police? So they work with the police, right? Because I'm thinking with the Hannah case. Would the prosecutors there be representing the police?
Well, there's the law, Michael Bell.
Okay, well, just to restrict that to Lake County, that's part of the mentality that Waller has set, that he's been operating on. That is, he's strictly for the police. I mean, matter of fact, it's safe to say there's been, out of all the brutality and convictions of people who were innocent, there's been, there hasn't been any police officers that has gotten in trouble behind that. As a matter of fact, you can look on record and what is it, Ron White, for instance, and this is what, maybe a couple years old, police officer. He worked for the department. They found that he was into sexual activity with minors. Nierheim, this is recently, Nierheim allowed him to leave and go to California. So no police officers have ever been convicted of any serious wrongdoing. Maybe crashing a police vehicle, losing a flashlight, something of that nature.
But nothing
yes,
serious.
But nothing serious. So in Lake County, I'm going to say that's the norm. We're going to stick up for the police officers.
So
that's
the prosecutor,
right.
it basically defends the police officers.
Yeah, but it's not supposed to be that way.
Well, we're going to let Preacher Howard, you know, he has a vision, and he's been here for over 50 years. And he's from Saxon, Missouri. I'm sure things like this didn't happen in Saxon, Missouri.
Of course not.
Oh, yeah, worse. At the age of 14 or 15 years, I saw a lynch mob, lynch a man, a black man in my hometown, and that is one of the worst things you ever hope it never have to witness something like that. But back to what we were talking about, I was at a meeting, community meeting, and someone from the state attorney's office was bragging about the number of convictions. And I was asking them, Thurgood Marshall once said, he was heavy with the NAACP, that I'd rather let 10 guilty men go free than to prosecute wrongfully one innocent man. And when I heard that, I was a young kid, and I said, well, you let 10 guilty men go free just to get one? And, but what he was saying, that if you destroy that innocent man, he'll be destroyed forever. But the guilty man, you'll get him in the next courtroom, go right down the hall, you'll find him down on another case. And with the problems that we're talking about, some of the people had the education or money to defend, like in your case, you were able to defend yourself. What do you think would happen to a person who didn't have your skills, maybe your money? There's no, when they say justice for all, it's just all of us or all of them. That's how justice in the state of Illinois works. It's justice just for those who are well connected. They're the one who get the break. It's a many. It's more innocent people in jail than there are guilty people. If you really could go back and do the work, the number, there's a lot of innocent people that has gone to jail and have done 6, 8, 9, 10 years, just enough to destroy them for the rest of their life.
Preacher, what do you think, like I've read recently, that we're spending more money, like $3 every one, to build a prison for the next 18 years than we are to build schools.
Yeah.
We're putting more money in the prison area than we are in education. So if we do that, you know, it's obvious, you know, you're going to have more prisoners because we're not giving it to the education of the children.
Well, it's more money in particularly keeping black people in jail than it is educating them. So if you don't go to school and get an education, your next stop, 90% of the stuff, is going to be jail. And so the best way to get you there is deny you the education at 13, 14, and 15 years old. When you get 19 and 20 years old, you don't know anything to do but what you've been doing all your life and it's wrong. So you're a perfect candidate to go. The state of Illinois spends almost $40,000 a year to incarcerate
one person.
One person, right?
And we spend $12,000 a year to educate.
Educate, yeah. So you see how, so they're using poor people, particularly blacks, as a cash station, the ATM machine. We are the one who paying the salaries for all the high-paying salaries, and we're paying it on the sweat of our young kids who have been incarcerated, and many times wrongfully, something that should not have been worth going to jail, but they want you in that jail because you represent 40,000. And I think a lot of states now is going to privatizing.
Yes, prisons,
which
is a real big business.
So I know someone who has a lot of money invested in. They did it not because they need the money.
It's a business venture.
They just did not just to see how the system works. But it's big returns on that. Most jails now to visit your relative, it costs you almost $40, $50 just to go visit a relative. So a person in jail and stay 2 weeks in jail, and his mother can't afford to visit him, father can't afford to visit him.
Yes,
And this is the problem. These problems have been existing in the black community for years,
Yes, sir.
but they were never talked about.
Yes, sir.
And it's because of the goodness of people like you and Dr. Rudd was able to come out and highlight these things. So we wish we could get a forum and have people like yourself to come to this forum and educate our people in our community, because we got people in our community believe every time a person is arrested, they're guilty, they did everything they were charged of.
Yes, sir.
And at the same time, somebody sitting back behind the desk with a
Yes, sir.
$100,000 a year job is
Yes, sir.
benefit from results of those figures, boosting his numbers up. There's no truth in it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Ruff.
And first of all, like I say, the reason why the United States was one of the richest countries in the world is because of slavery, and we know history do repeat itself. And now incarceration is a big business, and that's even wrong, because that creates a demand for bodies, and it's just unfair, because most of the people in there are really slaves now, you know, to big corporations that, like he said, privatize, that's running the penitentiaries.
Well, I think it's just
And-
like the preacher said, that somebody's writing those checks for $100,000, because even when you tell people in your community, your kids are getting a great education, they're just fine. They're doing just fine. Your kids are doing fine for $12,000. But we're going to put $40,000 because they can do better in prison, because then they can write the $100,000. And while we listen and believe that, we believe these kids are getting good education. When they're walking the streets, our teen pregnancy is up, gangs are
Don't
up.
even get me started
You
on
know?
abortion. You know, and this is why I have a lot of problems with most of the pastors in Lake County. And I don't bite my tongue. You know what I mean? And I don't pull derringers from my sleeve. I come straight off the hip. We're ignorant in so many ways, but yet they just hoop and holler on Sundays. Now, you mentioned abortion. I ask black people all the time, do you know what the #1 killer in the black community is? Some will say drugs. Some will say murder. Some will say dope. You know, they'll say the #1 killer in the black community is abortion. Do you know this day, yesterday, and every 365 days a year, every day, 1,452 black babies, we lead in that, are being aborted. And it's just a shame. This is not talked about, you know.
No, I think we need to just, I think it goes beyond the abortion. I think the teen pregnancy needs to stop. It needs to come down.
Well, it's got to be
because in Lake
It's got to
County,
be talked about.
I agree, because in Lake County, North Chicago has the highest rate of teen pregnancy in all of Lake County.
And I'm going to ask you something. Do you ever hear this spoke of on Sundays in church?
No, but you hear me talk about it all the time. But that's why I want to bring a charter school, so we can have these girls in college preparatory schools where they can go to school, get education, and become a doctor, or become a lawyer, or become a judge, instead of becoming a mother at 13 years old. That has got to stop.
It's a
and then we'll
shame.
have to worry about abortion if we can just
It's truly a shame.
abstain.
And I want
do
to
it in
say this
Catholic
real
schools.
quick, too. We're on the verge of a lot of change. I just can't say enough about this guy. Before he came to town, that office always had a puppet in there. And, you know, and I'm not speaking ill of the dead, speaking of Yancey. I'm speaking truth of the dead. You know, he was a former, police chief or what have you. Matter of fact, on the Darren Hanna case, I think it took him 6 months. And when he handed down his verdict, it was undetermined. I don't know. I don't know. And Rudd just have educated us in just so many areas.
But do you think it's because he wasn't a doctor? Because Dr. Rudd went there with a whole different perspective.
Okay, now. Here's what I've learned, and I thank you again, sir. There's 5 causes of death. And that's
Five
manners of death. That's suicide.
Can I quote him?
Yeah.
Natural,
Accidental.
accidental, suicide, homicide, and undetermined.
Okay, now.
I got this from Dr. Rudd.
Oh, he's educated us in so many
He's
things.
a guest on my radio show this morning and
Now-
volunteered to come right back here tonight.
Now, the thing to that, now undetermined is normally you know, like SIDS, a little baby, because their organs is so new. It's hard to say what really happened. But I mean, you're laughing stock if you make a call on an adult and you say undetermined. That just don't happen. That makes you a laughing stock in that field. So that takes me back to what I said originally with Waller. That mentality, that's what's been going on here, and I give you a lot of credit because you come to town and you shot straight from the hip and you called everything just like it was, and it ignited a lot of us. And I'm gonna say this, I shoot it straight up. Man, from Lake Forest, we don't have to be bothered with this. He can come in and get his check. He can go back across the other side and have it made, you know. And I thank you for standing up, and it's the mandatory for the viewing audience to know we need this gentleman because he makes them become held accountable for a lot of things.
I would like to shake your hand too, Dr. Rudd.
Oh, thank you. By the way,
one of the problems we have in particular, and I would say North Chicago, is that we don't get qualified people like yourself and put them in office. My grandfather was a slave. He used to use the word all the time. A man that follows the fool, a man that follows the fool is a bigger fool than the fool he's following. And for years and years I used to hear him say that. It looked like he was saying the same thing over and over, and I didn't understand what he said. But we do not have good leaders, particularly in our community, and look like it's a concerted effort to find those who they put them in leadership positions that can strictly control. And when you find a person in a position that do not have the skill, he is someone who will follow orders, and that is what causing keeping these problems going on in our community.
Fellow colleagues, Dr. Rudd, MD, is a licensed physician and surgeon. He's a board certified in anatomic and clinical pathologist. Been in Lake County since 1979. And I guess he determined himself. He was not persuaded to run for the office of coroner. Is that right, Dr.?
That's correct. I actually retired in 2009 to take care of my mother, who was at the end stage of Alzheimer's. And when I read about and heard about Darren, I was aghast at what was going on in terms of this investigation when it was quite obvious. Let me just say that undetermined manner of death is under 10% of all deaths. It's very rare. Ralph said it correctly. It's basically a SIDS death. Okay, it's young children that die, and we don't really have an exact cause. We have a few effects, but we really don't know why. We sort of know why now. They sort of turn over, and their nose and mouth is pressed against some sort of bed or sheeting, and they just essentially suffocate, but there's nothing really there that shows that. So I got involved because of that, and I'm very glad I did because of all the people I met, including Denise now, who's new to me, when she contacted me to help her. We need more citizens like Ralph and Denise. Okay, this is a participatory democracy. If you just sit back and treat your elected officials as servants, they'll turn on you. Okay, because they get in office and they think all of a sudden, I've got 4 years, I do as I please. Okay, you can't do that. You've got to be active. Okay, this country was founded, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You don't sit back in a chair and expect these people you voted in to do what you think you want them to do.
That's the problem.
You've got to get active, and I've said it before. I think one of the basic ways, I mean, Denise is incredible. I mean, you read about what she's done. Same thing with Ralph, risking his reputation and business. You need to get at the ground level. Participate in getting in your local Democratic or Republican Party. See if there is a precinct committeeman. If there isn't, run, because then you get to meet the people you elect.
Yep.
Because there are
right.
meetings.
That is the real problem.
And I would stay away from party. I've never been a party person. I think people who are Democrats and Republicans are no different than any other institution
Either their
that's
agenda's
out
all
there.
the same.
I think, oh, absolutely, it is. Because if you're Democrat, you're going to be biased to Democrats. You always hear the Democrats calling out the Republicans, Republicans calling out the Democrats. But how often do you really hear about the Democrat calling out the Democrat? But it shouldn't really be that way me personally, I'm independent. I never was a party person. I just want to be involved. I'll meet or endorse a Republican state's attorney. I don't care what party affiliation, if you have certain values. And
But I think the key is what Dr. Rudd said. When they get these jobs, they forget that they were elected to represent us, to vote and to operate for us. And I don't care if it's a school board, if it's legislature, it's a state office. They represent themselves. And that's the part that bothers me. And like, wow, we put you in here, we're paying you, and you're voting by your conscience, not the conscience of your constituents.
Right.
That is a real
Yeah,
problem.
and it's
like you
really
said.
sad. That's something else that bothers me because, like I say, you know, I pretty much narrowed it down to if you want to control the masses of black people in any town, pay the pastor off, and you got them.
That's sad.
That's sad, but true.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opinions expressed by our guests are those of theirs and not
By
of
your
the
guests.
or the station.
Yeah.
I would like to say this, that I've enjoyed this myself as a guest, as a host. So guest and host. I've been a guest and host tonight.
That's true.
Tara Thomas, a co-host, and she's done something about education and
I'm trying.
top educator, and she's the founder of North Shore Prep Foundation, and she's trying to make a difference in her own school, saving our kids in the community. Lord Preacher Howard is our senior person, and we got permission from him. We still, yes sir and no sir. We still
Absolutely.
haven't gotten away from that. And we
Absolutely.
appreciate your vision, your comments tonight. And Denise Rothhammer, founding executive director of Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence. I guess we need a whole program on that sometime soon to talk about that. Dr. Rudd, MD, and we've had you twice today, once radio and now on television, to bring us up to date on the coroner's office. And Ralph Peterson Jr., always great to have you as a community activist. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Community Forum. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.